the big problem is some research even suggests, guess how often we're in a state of survival? Some research even suggests we're in it for about 70% of our adult lives.
Wow.
So bottom line, for a majority of our adult lives, because
As I
of the
reach for my
stress.
Xanax.
Yeah, exactly. We're in a survival state for a majority of our adult lives. And that's heartbreaking because that means for a majority of our adult lives, we're not accessing our critical thinking skills.
Hey everyone, today's guest is Dr. Eugene Choi. Eugene is a transformational mindset coach who works at the intersection of neuroscience, high-performance psychology, and leadership. With a background in clinical pharmacy and brain science, he helps founders, executives, and high-performance leaders be able to activate what they call the executive brain, the part responsible for clarity, focus, creativity, and decision-making under pressure. He's worked with thousands of leaders navigating stress, growth, burnout, and performance plateaus. And beyond that, he's built an audience over 30 million views by translating complex neuroscience into practical tools people can actually use. And today, we want to talk about something that's relevant to all of you agency owners, how to be able to activate your unique talents in your business instead of kind of focusing and fighting against what we have as your perceived weaknesses. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Robert. It's great to be here.
So I want to start with this kind of concept of entrepreneurs and their kind of natural strengths. And there's I feel like there's this dichotomy of that struggle to use and just lean into natural strengths. And I'm wondering why that comes up for entrepreneurs in the first place.
So in a nutshell, if you really think about it, our primary function of our minds, of our brains every day is basically to actually physically survive. So we need to not be killed and eat food. And with modern day society, have a roof to live under, right? We used to not do that. But that's the main thing that it prioritizes. So while our brains are great at helping us survive physically, it is actually horrible at helping us thrive. So when we ask ourselves questions like, oh, what are my unique talents? What are my strengths? If your brain is so busy just trying to survive every day, that takes a back seat, if that makes sense. So I think for entrepreneurs, we tend to go in that survival mode more often because our work is our livelihood. If we're not making sales, do you see what I'm saying? If we're not making sales, that's what our brain will keep focusing on rather than focus on, well, hold on, let's take a moment here and look at our strengths. What are our potential strengths in the long term that can help us grow? So our brains aren't capable of long-term thinking when we're under stress. And I think because of that fact, a lot of our entrepreneurs have trouble even having clarity what their strengths are.
Interesting. And, I hadn't really thought about it in the context of just pure animalistic kind of brain component of how that actually derives into not actually focusing on that thriving component. It's really an interesting idea. The thing that it kind of brings up for me then is how does someone slow themselves down enough to be able to, one, obviously we'd have to try to remove themselves from the stressful components to be able to take that time. But if the brain doesn't really have that long-term thinking, which is really necessary in order for us to be able to figure out where can we ultimately thrive. But how does someone take, when they're in the position of they're struggling to figure out what their actual natural strengths and talents are within their own business, how can they slow themselves down, or what do they need to do in order to be able to do an assessment of that appropriately?
Yeah, so one of the first exercises I always bring people through is an awareness exercise. So it gets pretty deep of a rabbit hole, but if we don't do this first, it's the thing that will block us from getting that clarity. So think about it this way. Imagine you're a hungry tiger's in front of you ready to eat you, right? And it shows up in the room. Are you going to look anywhere else except where that tiger is in the room? So what happens when we're under stress, which a lot of us entrepreneurs are, because we're figuring a lot of stuff out, there's a lot of stressful, high stakes situations, your brain actually goes into tunnel vision. It literally goes into tunnel vision. Just like if a tiger walks into the room, you're not looking anywhere else except where that tiger is. So the downside of that is outside of this tunnel, what's outside of this tunnel? Guaranteed, the solutions are there, the creative ideas are there. You see what I'm saying? All of this information that you might need that you need to be aware of, it's just not there. So one of the first awareness exercise, this is actually the core of my work, is bringing people through this awareness exercise. If you can get really good at this, I guarantee you, your life will get better, even if it's by a little bit. And this awareness exercise is just first understanding your brain. It's this simple. It's simple principle. Your brain operates in one of two states at any given time. in your life. It's one or the other. You can't be in both at the same time. It's one or the other. It's what's called a survival state. So this is the mode that your brain is helping you physically survive. It is actually only meant for physical danger situations. It is not meant for anything else. So this is the part where we're saying it's great at helping you survive, but when it comes to figuring out a complex problem at work or your business, it's not going to help you do that. Why? When you're in a state of survival, your brain actually can't think. Yeah. It's only reacting. It cannot think, because if there's a threat in front of you that can physically harm you, you start sitting there and thinking, it's already too late. You will get harmed. So it is just a natural state that we're in where you cannot think. You are only reacting without thinking. Compare that to what I call an executive state. This is where your brain's higher functions come from. Your critical thinking skills, your ability to have empathy and connect with someone, your creativity comes from here, your ability to access your intuition. The list just goes on and on and on. This is where a lot of your higher functions, brain's higher functions that we've evolved into, that we have now, are able to be accessed. But the big problem is some research even suggests, guess how often we're in a state of survival? Some research even suggests we're in it for about 70% of our adult lives.
Wow.
So bottom line, for a majority of our adult lives, because of the stress.
As I return my Xanax.
Yeah, exactly. We're in a survival state for a majority of our adult lives. And that's heartbreaking, because that means for a majority of our adult lives, we're not accessing our critical thinking skills. We're not accessing our creativity. We're not accessing our problem solving skills. We're not accessing our ability to connect with other people, because when you're in survival, you're not in a mood to be empathetic. We form a lot of transactional relationships when we're in survival, don't we? I scratch your back, you scratch mine.
Yeah.
And at some point it gets to you. And I think unless we become aware of this first, we can't change it. And awareness step number one, how often are you just not feeling good? That's the first thing. How often do we feel anxious, stressed, upset, annoyed, angry? This is the reason why we're in survival for most of our adult lives, because what does the research show? The research shows that emotional pain can be just as painful as physical pain based on the way our brain processes information. So what your brain is doing is it's kind of tricked, in a sense, into thinking these uncomfortable emotions are actually life-threatening situations. So because of that, boom, your brain goes into survival state. You're losing access to the higher functions of your brain. So that's the first thing to be aware of, where, okay, I can see that. I can see why I'm not accessing my strengths. I'm not seeing these things I need to see, because I can see a majority of my life I am in survival.
That's really interesting. And I feel like it has such incredibly far-reaching implications, especially if most adults are sitting in 70% of their lives in that survival mode, or the research is indicating that that's a potential up to that amount. The thing that I wonder, right, is like, how does this actually change decision-making in how people are actually looking at the way that the things that they have in front of them, right? So like, the reality of an entrepreneur is that they're building businesses around things that they either believe that they're supposed to be doing versus what they actually should be doing. And where does that actually have implication to what they're actually strategically or structurally doing within the business, if they are living in the survival brain versus the empathetic brain?
Right. So there's a little bit of irony here, right? Because when you're in a state of survival, your brain hates unpredictability. Like, it hates uncertainty, right? I don't know if unpredictability is a word, so I might have just made that up. But but it hates uncertainty, uncertain territory. But as a business owner, what is required for you to grow your business? If you really want to grow your business, you probably have to do the things you haven't done yet that will actually grow your business, because the things you're already doing is probably not the thing that's helping you grow your business. Is this making sense? But the irony is your brain doesn't like to do those uncertain things, especially if you're in a state of survival. Why? Because when we used to live in the caves in prehistoric times, if you go out into uncertain territory, you might get killed by a wild animal. So it's actually embedded in our biology to not like uncertainty. However, as a business owner, we need to step into that uncertainty in order to grow our business. So your brain will, when it's in survival, it likes to do the same thing again and again, because it tries to create a sense of predictability, even though if it's a false sense of predictability. So I'm sure your audience can relate to this. I've done it myself. I'm guilty of this, right? This is why we do the same things that won't actually grow our business, such as, you know what, let me spend the next 2 weeks working on my website, even though I have no traffic on my website yet, rather than building relationships with people that could actually be potential clients that I can help. Right? Your brain will do what's comfortable with and do it again and again, because it creates a sense of predictability, but even though it's not the thing that will actually help you grow the business.
So I'm taking the things that you're saying, right, and I'm applying it to myself, and it just brings up a lot of weird things in me, and I'm curious of how this applies both to leaders in general, but I'm also going to ask like a very personal oriented question now.
Of course.
So one of the things that this is a point of pride, but I'm wondering how this actually impacts me, is like I tend to lean into the things that I am incredibly most uncomfortable with first. So like I will start my day there in the thing that feels like the thing that stresses me out the most, the thing that bothers me the most, the thing that I actually want to do least, that uncomfortable, that uncertain area is something that I start with. And I'm curious, does that actually immediately, for every single person, just biologically, does that put me immediately into survival right at the start of the day, which is the wrong thing for me to be doing?
Oh, yeah.
Curious.
This is a great rabbit hole. Yeah, let's go there. So the first thing to examine is if you ever have a thought, your brain conducts electricity. Your nervous system runs on electricity, by the way, right? Mm-hmm. So what's happening is if you had a thought, if I had a brain scan to your head, you would see electrical activity occurring in the brain. So what's happening in that electrical activity is basically your neurons, every cell in your nervous system, they communicate with each other through electricity. And the way they do that is that stimulation happens, it releases a chemical if you remember from biology or anatomy or whatever class it was, they're called neuropeptides, neurotransmitters. That's their way of your cells communicating with each other. So long story short, what's happening is those are chemicals getting released in between those cells to talk to each other. So imagine you have a thought, electrical activity happens, it makes its way down your spinal cord and it hits one of your hormonal centers to release a hormone, and that's what your feelings are actually. So for example, if you tend to be an angry person, you might wake up one day and your body's going, hey, I'm not feeling my anger. And just like a drug addict going, hey, brain, give me my dose of anger. Electrical activity happens, makes its way down your spinal cord. Your adrenal glands are releasing adrenaline. Now you're feeling the feeling of anger while you're going, oh, I'm so pissed off thinking about whoever, right? My boss, my coworker, my clients, whatever that I don't like. While you're feeling angry, your body's going, ooh, that feels so good. I got my fix. So remember, when you're in a state of survival, it likes to stick with what it's used to. Most people don't realize our bodies, just like it can get addicted to a recreational drug, it can get addicted to the feelings, the chemicals of our feelings. So if you ever meet a person that tends to be angry, that tends to be complaining, that tends to be sad, it's very, very likely their bodies just got used to the feeling. It doesn't mean it can't change. I mean, it's just, like I said, this is an awareness journey. What if our bodies, just like it can get addicted to chemical drugs, it gets addicted to the chemicals of our feelings? So that's why we wake up in the morning, and if we're in the world of anxiety and your body's used to anxiety, it actually feels scary when you're not feeling anxious. Isn't that weird? It's like, this doesn't feel normal for me. I'm feeling happy. This doesn't feel normal. Where's my anxiety? I'm comfortable with anxiety.
Interesting. That was the most like scientific way of calling me an adrenaline junkie or addict. Interesting.
There's science to it. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that like is coming up for me now is when you're in this kind of place under stress. So now that you're in that survival brain and you are stressed out for whatever reason, what does that actually have from, and how does it hide your like innate talents or the best like kind of qualities, your strengths as an entrepreneur? What does it have correlation to that?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I guess the thing to look at is, what does this actually look like in daily life? I think this is where it becomes most empowering, when you really start to look at this. So what do I mean by this? If you can start understanding what survival state actually looks like, it's the thing that gives you the empowerment to make the change in your nervous system, in your brain, and how you operate, right? So if you want to grow your business, if you can become aware of this, you'll change it. Best example I give is, imagine you have a piece of broccoli stuck between your teeth. How do you have the power to remove that unless it comes into your awareness, whether someone points it out to you or you see it in the mirror? So it's all about awareness as step one. If you want to grow your business to the level you want, awareness is always step one, in my opinion. We need to look at what survival state actually looks like. Your brain can only do one of three things reactively in survival state. You're doing it without thinking. You react without thinking. It's called the fight, flight, freeze response. A lot of us have heard that phrase. It's very obvious in a biological threatening situation. So if a hungry tiger is in front of you about to eat you, you're either going to pick up a weapon to fight the tiger, you're going to run for your life in flight, you run for your life, and then freeze, you're going to play dead. So possums are famous for doing this because they're predators, like their food alive, so they play dead. If you've ever seen those war movies, humans do it in life-threatening situations so that the enemy doesn't kill them. So that's very obvious. What you want to get good at is understanding what the subtleties look like. Because remember, we're not surviving from physical life-threatening situations for a majority of our adult life. We're actually surviving from emotional survival, its purposes. So what does that mean? Whenever we feel something uncomfortable, we react in one of three ways: fight, flight, freeze. So what does a fight response look like when it's an emotional survival situation? If someone said something and they hurt your feelings, your brain gets triggered and we fight back and we argue. So whenever you get into a fight with someone, the sad thing is, what is your brain doing and perceiving that person as? Your brain, you're about to get into an argument with your loved one. Your brain is literally going, enemy. This is a person that's trying to hurt me. We need to fight. We need to hurt this person. So how do we fight? We verbally attack them. And unfortunately, in some situations, in some households, it's physically attack, right? So when your brain is viewing this person as an enemy, you're going to hurt them. And I think this breaks my heart a lot as a parent now, because I mean, I've done that to my kids, right? I'm not proud of that when you go into a fight mode. It gets even more subtle. What's another one is, yeah, physical fights can happen. What about the need to prove yourself? Why do we fight to prove ourselves? Why do we fight to work harder? Why do we have a need to prove ourselves unless what we perceive about ourselves is already not so great? Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. I have a client that I coached once, and we're talking about the fight, flight, freeze response, and he's going, oh my God, I've been fighting my whole life. He's in his 60s now, and very successful life, right? Beautiful home, multi-million-dollar, all that stuff. He had all that.
Yeah.
And I'm going, okay, like, what are you fighting for? And he said, I've been fighting my whole life to prove to people that I'm better than my older brother. His older brother was an NFL football player. And he was sharing with me how when he was in high school, his high school football coach said to him, don't even bother. You're never going to be as good as your brother. And that hurts. So when we feel hurt,
naturally,
one of the responses we have is a fight response. And I think for a lot of biological males, I don't know if it's a testosterone thing, right? But I think it's also a cultural thing, right? Like the message that a lot of heterosexual fathers give to their kids about what masculinity is, right? Don't show emotion, right? Like toughen it up, suck it up, right? Man up, right? They use that phrase. And I think that's why a lot of males, biological males, tend to deal with these uncomfortable emotions by going into that fight response for that reason. Right. So I think that's an interesting thing to look at, because that's one of the ways we deal with our emotional discomfort is we just fight. But remember, your brain is not in a thinking mode. How do entrepreneurs do this? They just think if they work harder, they'll succeed.
Let's take the reactive mind for a second, and then now put us into the executive mind. Like, what is the distinction between the two, and like, how do they interact differently with our decision making and how we show up in the world? I mean, we spent a reasonable amount of time talking about the fight or flight and the survival component, which 70%, I'm going to have to take some time to digest that component and take stock and awareness of it myself. But I'm curious on the opposite end. What does that mean?
So when you're in the executive state instead, right, and you're not in a fight mode, your brain can actually think. You work smarter, not harder. So people who are in the fight mode, just if you ever meet those types of people or are one of those people, I just work really hard and hope I will succeed, and that day just keeps fleeing you. It doesn't feel like it's coming. It's because our brains are in the work harder mode. So when you get train your nervous system to get into an executive state, your mind opens up, your higher functions turn on. You see what I'm saying? The example I like to give, like while we're in the fight response, is another client of mine, all that stuff, had a marketing agency, did really well in his field and grew it. And he was talking about this. He's like, no, wait, hold on. You need the survival state sometimes. And I'm like, only if your life's about, like, only if you're in physical danger. That's technically speaking, biologically, that's the only time you really need it. He's like, no, you don't understand. Debating me. He's like, I hit rock bottom. My second wife left me because she was cheating on me. The first wife cheated on him too. Still, court orders him to pay over $2,000 a month in child support. And he hit rock bottom. He said, I remember, he was sharing a memory with me. I remember when my son was asking me for ice cream, I didn't even have the money to buy him ice cream. So I'm scraping all the coins I could find in the house to buy him one. And he's like, that was the day I made a decision that I'm going to keep my head down and my shoulder up, and I'm going to bash through concrete wall to solve this problem. And it worked. It's what got him to, because he eventually rebuilt the business and all that. Yeah. And I said, that's a fair argument. It's very valid. Survival state does get stuff done. But what if, just as a thought, what if because you trained your body and your mind to get into executive state more often, because your thinking brain turns on, even if it's for a moment, your nervous system, your body relaxes, your shoulders are down. I'm using his analogy, your head, instead of head down, heads up. And what you might see is those concrete walls you said you had to bash through are only 3 feet wide. Meaning, what if there were easier solutions, better ideas, more efficient?
I've gone to it.
You ever meet that type of person? It's like, there's a better way to do this. And I go, no, that's fine. I'll stick with the way I do it. Our fight mode, our survival brain will keep things in tunnel vision, and it prevents us from working smarter, not harder. And it just makes it hard on ourselves when it doesn't need to be.
The thing that came up for me while you were saying that I wonder whether there's correlation between it. It's like the idea that people are able to see your life and the solutions for you a lot simpler than you can, because they're not emotionally attached to it.
They're not in survival if they're looking at you.
Yeah.
especially if they love you.
Yeah.
But when we're in survival, we stay stuck in our own tunnel vision. That's all we see.
Interesting.
That's biologically true too. When we feel stressed, when we feel emotionally uncomfortable, your body is interpreting that as a threat. So you go into tunnel vision and our brain's not thinking, and we're only looking at the information that we're used to looking at. So if we're used to being stressed, your brain will only look for things that keep you stressed. If we're used to being anxious, your brain will only look at things that will keep you anxious, even though outside of this tunnel might be some amazing information for you.
So if you were to suggest a tool to be able to move someone from that reactive survival brain more into the executive brain, what is the utility? Like, how do you even start along that journey to removing yourself from that reactive place?
It's work, but my first recommendation is always just spending the time paying attention. That's number one. I can give the practical tools afterwards that everyone loves, right? But that's what I'm like trying to teach people is like, we have to look. You have to be willing to look. That's step one. No one wants to look. You know what? You know what I like to say? You know what personal development is like? You ever see those people that are like, oh, treat yourself, take yourself out, pamper yourself. That also is survival for a lot of people, by the way. It's a distraction that they do on purpose to not look at the thing they don't want to look at. Personal growth feels like this. This is what I've realized after coaching so many individuals. Personal growth feels like, imagine you go on a spending spree, way overspent. You've more than maxed out your credit card because you splurged. And personal growth is the feeling when that bill shows up, and it's that feeling of, I don't want to open this bill. I don't want to look at the statement. That's what personal growth feels like, because you're going to have to look at your insecurities. You're going to have to look at your doubts, your limiting beliefs, all of that stuff that we don't like about ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to look. And then once you're willing to look, step two is we have to be able to train ourselves to spot it. So if we went over fight response, we need to be able to spot the flight response. What does flight look like? It's things like procrastination. But where it gets really tricky and subtle is imagine things like, by the way, overworking is also a flight response. It's a fight response for some people, but it's a flight response for some others. Oh, I don't like what's happening at home. Let me flee and go to my work as a distraction to keep myself busy. Numbing ourselves is a flight response. And it's important not to judge it, by the way, because judging is a fight response, by the way. If you judge someone's character, you ever meet people who like to gossip? That's why we do that. It's I have an insecurity about myself, so let me put this other person down and maybe it will help me feel better about myself, right? That's a form of fight response for people who do that. Flight response, when we numb ourselves, again, no judgment. We all do this. We all have our own poison we like to choose. Some people overindulge in things like alcohol, sex, drugs, food to the point of addiction, right? In some people. And that's a flight response for a lot of us, to numb ourselves, to avoid the feeling we don't want to feel. And then we freeze. Freeze is when you just play dead. So if you get caught in a lie, people do that, right? They freeze their bodies. But it also happens when you hear tragic news. It also happens where something shocking happens. Your nervous system just freezes up as a mode to protect yourself. This is why I realized there's no such thing as laziness, by the way. Where someone might be labeling someone as a person that's lazy, I have found that most of those people, there's some sort of chronic freeze response going on in their whole nervous system for whatever reason, whatever's happened in their life. Their body just chooses to freeze for a lot of their days. This is why we don't make decisions. We don't take action when we're in our freeze response. So if you can spend time paying attention to other people's always easier, of course, right? It's always easier to spot other people's. And then have the courage to start looking within and looking at your own fight, flight, freeze responses. I guarantee you that's going to be the thing that empowers you to start changing that. So once you get really good at spotting it, that's step one. And then we can go into like practical steps and all of that kind of stuff. But we have to be willing to look. Most people aren't willing to look. They just keep themselves busy.
So one of the things that I was recommended to me in my early 20s by a colleague of mine, she had been a practicing psychologist and ended up leaving that role and working as an operations person for a patient having actually gone crazy and stalking her and stuff. But anyways, she made a suggestion to me at that point, and she said that, the number one thing that you can do to grow as a human being, to be able to develop yourself, is every single day to take stock of what took place and how you reacted and why you reacted, and just kind of look at yourself in the mirror. And so I've done this every single day for now 20 odd years. And I'm curious of like, how does it actually, but then I still have the response where I was describing earlier, that I wake up every morning and I go after the thing that is like the most stressful for me, or the thing that makes me feel the most alive. And so it's like, okay, so I'm practicing the thing that you just described, but maybe I'm not doing it as effectively as I should be. So there's the judges out on that one. It's like this distinction between this ability to self-sabotage versus like live in this kind of higher level executive thinking. And like, how do you see like the progress that you're making and whether you're doing that right thing. Like I feel like it feels a little jumbled, at least to me at the moment.
Yeah. No, that's very valid. And what your friend recommended is spot on advice. I am 100% in support of that advice. And it's a yes and. So what's fascinating is the neuroscience helps create even more texture to it, to that advice. So here's what I mean. So the science shows that by the time you're about 35 years old, 90 to 95% of your brain goes subconscious. So what does that mean in basic terms? It's on autopilot. So your brain's very efficient. So imagine this. You're not going to go down the stairs going, let me put my right foot out now. Let me put my left foot on the next stair. You're not doing that. You just do it without thinking, correct? Your brain got efficient. We call them habits. A lot of these things are habits. Most people don't realize it's doing the same thing with your thoughts, with your feelings and your actions or your reactions. So we think 70,000 thoughts a day. 90 to 95% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before. Majority of our thoughts for a lot of people tend to be not so nice thoughts about yourself. So what does that trigger your nervous system into? Survival state or executive state? Tends to put us into a survival state. So then now your feelings, like I mentioned earlier, your feelings are chemicals. So your body tends to feel things on autopilot. So and when it doesn't, it feels not normal to the body, even though it's probably not going to be helpful for you with things like growing your business or building longer, good relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And then the action, same thing. We do the same. Our body memorizes actions. You don't sit there and go, let me brush my teeth in the morning. Your body just kind of goes when it's time to brush its teeth and it just does it. It's very efficient. So the thing you also want to start looking at when you're doing the look yourself in the mirror type exercise is, what is my autopilot? What is some of my autopilot? Whoa, I do have an autopilot that whenever I give a talk or whenever I do a presentation, after that presentation, my first thought is, damn, this sucked. Or your focus is to look at what wasn't good. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, oh, that is a pattern for me. Or self-sabotage, the same thing. Why do I think these thoughts? Your thoughts are habitual. And most people, and this is the deeper rabbit hole, is like, how do you change the autopilot? It comes from working with your beliefs, your perspectives, how you perceive life. All of that kind of stuff comes into play, which we don't need to go into like full detail, but it's what it stems from.
Interestingly, and God, this makes me sound like such an egotistical bastard, but like, I feel like, and I was thinking about what you're saying and like, looking myself in the mirror of what is like that autopilot piece of like after a meeting and after a conversation, like most of the time I'm thinking, wow, Robert, you're such a badass. And then going on to the next one, like is what I'm telling myself. And it's like, okay, maybe, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm going to have to take stock of that later at the end of my day.
Yeah. We wouldn't know until you look at what's behind the autopilot, right?
Yeah, okay.
It's all dependent on what's happening on the inside.
Got it. So if a listener, right, and put it into practicality for them in a business context, if a listener right now is in, a revenue plateau, or they're overwhelmed by too much growth, or that the business is shrinking, or they've got payroll concerns or cash flow concerns or what have you of being an entrepreneur, frankly, and where would you have them start in this journey of the things that we've been talking about today from, a neuroscience oriented perspective?
Yeah. So it's all about shifting your state. That's what it comes down to. So you want to get better and better at doing this so that you can access the higher functions of your brain that can help you find these solutions, especially to difficult situations, even if it's a high pressure, high stakes, high change environment, right? So first step is, yes, it's that awareness phase. So what's next? Work with your body and work with your thoughts. So here's some quick tips that you can use. Working with your thoughts. There's a phrase in the psychology world, I think it's actually from the child parenting world. It's name it to tame it. So what that means is name your feelings to tame your feelings so that you can get out of survival. So UCLA did this study where they brought a bunch of neuroscientists were doing this for these people, bringing these people, and they would show, tie the brain scans to their heads to measure their brain waves and all that, and show photos of people in survival state emotions, let's say, for example. So what I mean by that is any feeling that doesn't feel good, anger, anxiety, frustration. As soon as they show the image, guess what happens in the brain scans? Their amygdala, which is where your survival state brain turns on from, immediately lights up. But what was fascinating was the researcher would say to the individual, can you name the emotion that you see on this person's face? And they go, oh, that's anger, that's anxiety, that's frustration. As soon as they named it, guess what happened? Survival state brain turned off, executive state brain turned on, which is your frontal lobe, right? Prefrontal cortex. Immediately turns on. Why does this happen? Remember, you can't be in both states at the same time.
Yeah.
To label something, not only empathy, but to label something also requires you to take a moment and think about it. So when we label our own emotions, we're able to regulate them, and you're helping your body and your mind, your brain, get out of survival state. So I'm feeling sad right now. I'm feeling frustrated right now. I'm feeling upset. Just You don't have to do it out loud.
All the years of therapy are making so much more sense to me right now.
Why did they make you do that, right? Yeah. It's like, I'm feeling upset. They know it's turning on the emotional regulation centers, which is not in your survival brain. It's in your executive brain. So when you do that, and then a clinical psychologist friend of mine too was like, oh, there's a nuance. Make sure you pay attention to the language too. It's not I am sad. It's I'm feeling sad. To say I am sad, I am so upset right now, I am so frustrated, it's a declarative statement. Like, we're used to that phrase being an identity. I am Eugene, I am sad, right? So if you just switch it from I'm feeling this way, it helps your brain more quickly register that it's a feeling. Feelings aren't permanent. How do we know feelings aren't permanent? Because they're not. They come and go. Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad, sometimes you're upset. They're not permanent. So the better you get at acknowledging that, the quicker you can regulate and get back to your executive brain. So especially in a brain where autopilot, a lot of your autopilot is survival. So you're training your brain to rewire itself to get out of survival. So just naming your feelings, right? Name it to tame it, right? And then working with your body. There's a phrase, right? When you move, your brain grooves, right? So movement helps, right? Going for a walk, or when my kids throw a tantrum, sometimes I just like make them jump up and down on the bed. I force them to jump up and down on the bed as hard as they can. It just regulates their body, right? Movement helps regulate your body. This is why deep breathing, working with your body, deep breaths. Why does that work? If you're in a life-threatening situation, you're not taking deep breaths. You're taking short, rapid, shallow breaths. Your heart is beating a mile a minute. Your body, by the way, is wasting a ton of energy when it's in a survival state because it thinks it's about to die. So all hands on deck. It's not a time to conserve energy. It's time to use up all my energy. So this is why people who are stressed out all the time get sick, because you have no more reserves. Your body's wasting a ton of energy all the time on autopilot, to say the least, right? And your body's overspending all that energy, right? And your heart's overworking, your lungs are over. So when you take a moment to consciously take a deep breath, you're tickling these nerves at the bottom of your lungs. They're called parasympathetic nerves. And it signals to your body, look, we're not being murdered right now. It's okay. If we're about to be murdered, I would not be breathing like this. It's kind of like signaling to your body. So just like you could tame a dog or a horse, most people don't realize our bodies are something to be tamed too, by the way, right? Because it has these habits, it has these, for efficiency purposes, based on what our brain has programmed it to do and our environments, right? It needs to be tamed in a sense so that we get ourselves out of survival. So working with the body, working with the thoughts at a high level, those are things that I recommend. Name it to tame it, deep breaths, right? Movement. Those are important things to consider. These are tips for in the moment. When you're noticing you're in survival, this is something you could do anytime, anywhere, right? Just to help you regulate as a step one.
I feel like so much of life has like come into context in this conversation, at least for me today. And I hope that listeners are feeling the same. I really have enjoyed the way that you have made what is a very complex idea, the neuroscience, into like this practical oriented like view of self. If agency owners listening today want to operate more out of clarity and less out of this stressful place in this survival brain, how can they find you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so this is what I've been shouting the rooftops ever since. So you can always reach me at my handles. I'm on Instagram or on LinkedIn. It's under Eugene K. Choi. And one of the things that I am actively building right now is to try to grow a community of people who are serious about rewiring their autopilot. And I'm happy to continue sharing what I learned, especially when it comes to rewiring the autopilot part. This is where you work with your thoughts, your belief systems, and all of that. That's at neurohackingschool.com. I have a whole online course there. In addition to that, we meet regularly once a month to answer any questions.
That's way cool. Make sure to check it out. We'll include the links in the show notes, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, Eugene.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in today. With all of the shifts in the industry, it is easy to feel overwhelmed or unsure of your next move. So I'm not here to try to sell you anything. I just want to give back and guide you through the uncertainty. Whether you're navigating new trends or just need some clarity, we're here to listen and offer advice. Head to creativeagencysuccess.com/chat to book a free 15-minute chat with an agency mentor who can provide you with a fresh perspective. Let's figure out the best steps for your agency's growth together.